Nope, not there. To what do? We are done with this chapter. Alright. The law of human progress. Alright. Welcome to the 107th episode of the Henry George Daily Devotional, where we read Progress and Poverty, an inquiry into the cause of industrial depressions and the increase of want with the increase of wealth, the remedy. We are here in book 10. The, what is book 10? Uh-oh. No, that's book 9. The law of human progress. And then chapter 3 is the law of human progress. That's what was confusing me. Well, 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 well. And the name of this book is An Inquiry into the Cause of Industrial Depressions and of Increase of Want with Increase of Wealth, the Remedy. I was sticking a bunch of thes in here. There's only the cause. An inquiry into the cause of industrial depressions and of increase of want with increase of wealth, the remedy, remedial. I just finished reading Henry George and the Crafting, it's not the Forming, and the Crafting of American Liberalism, which really, I guess my big takeaway was single taxers had a lot of influence in the early 20th century in American politics, and some in Canada, and some in England, some in Australia and New Zealand. Uh, they were influential in a lot of progressive um, movements that we praise highly. The secret ballot, women's vote, um, a progressive income tax rather than a flat income tax, some some land value taxes and property taxes, um, social security, I guess, and welfare. And then, I mean, then you have like conflicted policies of a bunch of, by conflicted, I mean some single taxers were for it and others were against it. But ultimately, my biggest takeaway from this book uh, is that electoral politics, the two-party system, is like the single taxers were so dominant and could only partially get some of their policies implemented, and that has helped the US, but in some ways it's also been this sort of like it's pushed people towards a lot of like band-aid or patching solutions and a bunch of like regulation and antitrust rather than which is, bopping them once they get to be too evil. But as long as all the companies just stay under our threshold of tyranny, it's okay. Like we've seen with so many giant companies where it's like, they get a little once we decide really that they're too big, um, then we'll do some anyway. Then we'll do something, but we don't address the root causes. And a number of Georges sort of were okay with a bunch of the planned economy or planned urban movement, which basically entrenched all of these small proprietors by just giving a bunch of chunks of land to veterans and promoting suburbia. And then, just like George was really worried about, uh, I forget which guy it was talking about it's like almost easier to implement a Georgist revolution in the UK where it was very clear that there was this, peerage, a landed class, um, and it was harder to do so in continental Europe where you had all these peasant proprietors. Well, what were the suburbs but this form of peasant proprietarying, and it like that solution of the suburbs and then building all of the infrastructure for them was this way of dealing with land tyranny by splitting it up and giving us a million little land tyrants instead of just the few. So a lot of the Georges towards the end of the book really despair of democracy. Some of them really start pushing for direct democracy and referendum, but that doesn't seem great. And ultimately, it really has pushed me more towards sortition as the first revolution. We need fair representative government without the party system, without campaigns, without the perverse incentives of running for office. And the perverse incentive of keeping that position. And of course, even with term limits, it still is just so expensive and costly to run for office that it's always going to be wealthy or people backed by wealth. Anyway, that's the book I finished reading. Now we'll return to George. He writes, "What then is the law of human progress, the law under which civilization advances? It must explain clearly and definitely, and not by vague generalities or superficial analogies, why, though mankind started presumably with the same capacities and at the same time, there now exist such wide differences in social development. It must account for the arrested civilizations, and for the decayed and destroyed civilizations, for the general facts as to the rise of civilization, and for the petrifying or enervating force which the progress of civilization has heretofore always evolved. It must account for retrogression as well as for progression, for the differences in general character between Asiatic and European civilizations, for the difference between classical and modern civilizations, for the different rates at which progress goes on, and for those bursts and starts and halts of progress which are so marked as minor phenomena. And thus it must show us what are the essential conditions of progress, and what social adjustments advance and what retard it. It is not difficult to discover such a law. We have but to look and we may see it. I do not pretend to give it scientific precision, but merely to point it out. The incentives to progress are the desires inherent in human nature. The desire to gratify the wants of the animal nature, the wants of the intellectual nature, and the wants of the sympathetic nature. The desire to be, to know, and to do. The desires that short of infinity can never be satisfied, as they grow by what they feed on. Mind is the instrument by which man advances, and by which each advance is secured, and made the vantage ground for new advances. Though he may not, by taking thought, add a cubit to his stature, a man may, by taking thought, extend his knowledge of the universe and his power over it, in what, so far as we can see, is an infinite degree. The narrow span of human life allows the individual to go but a short distance, but though each generation may do but little, yet generations succeeding to the gain of their predecessors may gradually elevate the status of mankind. As coral polyps, building one generation upon the work of the other, gradually elevate themselves from the bottom of the sea. Mental power is, therefore, the motor of progress, and men tend to advance in proportion to the mental power expended in progression. The mental power which is devoted to the extension of knowledge, the improvement of methods, and the betterment of social conditions. Now, mental power is a fixed quantity. That is to say, there is a limit to the work a man can do with his mind, as there is to the work he can do with his body. Therefore, the mental power which can be devoted to progress is only what is left after what is required for non-progressive purposes. These non-progressive purposes in which mental power is consumed may be classified as maintenance and conflict. A lot of maintenance and conflict these days. By maintenance, I mean not only the support of existence, but the keeping up of the social condition and the holding of advances already gained. By conflict, I mean not merely warfare and preparation for warfare, but all expenditure of mental power in seeking the gratification of desire at the expense of others and in resistance to such aggression. Need a pithy little term for bureaucratic waste, fake jobs. Because there's maintenance, conflict, and just pure waste, and the virtue signaling of maintenance or something. To compare society to a boat, her progress through the water will not depend upon the exertion of her crew, but upon the exertion devoted to propelling her. This will be lessened by any expenditure of force required for bailing, or any expenditure of force in fighting among themselves, or in pulling in different directions. I mean, this has to be a rowboat. If we're talking about, yeah, I don't know. What comes to mind first was like a sailboat, and then it's like, well, as long as somebody sets the sails, that's like some exertion. Now, as in a separated state, the whole powers of man are required to maintain existence. And mental power is set free for higher uses only by the association of men in communities, which permits the division of labor and all the economies which come with the cooperation of increased numbers. Association is the first essential of progress. It is not good for man to be alone. Association is the first essential of progress. Improvement becomes possible as men come together in peaceful association, and the wider and closer the association, the greater the possibilities of improvement. And as the wasteful expenditure of mental power in conflict becomes greater or less as the moral law, which accords to each an equality of rights, is ignored or is recognized, equality or justice is the second essential of progress. Association and justice. Thus, association and equality is the law of progress. Association frees mental power for expenditure and improvement, and equality, or justice, or freedom. For the terms here signify the same thing. The recognition of the moral law prevents the dissipation of this power in fruitless struggles. Here is the law of progress which will explain all diversities, all advances, all halts, and retrogressions. Men tend to progress just as they come closer together, and by cooperation with each other increase the mental power that may be devoted to improvement. But just as conflict is provoked or association develops inequality of condition and power, this tendency to progression is lessened, checked, and finally reversed. Given the same innate capacity, and it is evident that social development will go on faster or slower, will stop or turn back, according to the resistances it meets. In a general way, these obstacles to improvement may, in relation to the society itself, be classed as external and internal. The first, external, operating with greater force in the earlier stages of civilization. The latter, internal, becoming more important in the later stages of civilization. Man is social in his nature. Yes, it is not good for man to be alone. He does not require to be caught and tamed in order to induce him to live with his fellows. The utter helplessness with which he enters the world and the long period required for the maturity of his powers necessitate the family relation, which, as we may observe, is wider and in its extensions stronger among the ruder than among the more cultivated peoples. The first societies are families, expanding into tribes, still holding a mutual blood relationship, and even when they have become great nations, claiming a common descent. Given beings of this kind, placed on a globe of such diversified surface and climate as this, and it is evident that, even with equal capacity and an equal start, social development must be very different. The first limit or resistance to association will come from the conditions of physical nature, and as these greatly vary with locality, corresponding differences in social progress must show themselves. This is like what Janning was linking me to a few weeks ago. I can't remember exactly what it was. History? No. Videos. Signed in incorrectly. Comments. These are ones I haven't responded to. Why the West Rules for Now by Ian Morris. This sort of matches up with what George is saying here about the first limit or resistance to association will come from the conditions of physical nature, and these greatly vary with locality. Corresponding differences in social progress must show themselves. The net rapidity of increase and the closeness with which men, as they increase, can keep together will, in the rude state of knowledge in which reliance for subsistence must be principally upon the spontaneous offerings of nature, very largely depend upon climate, soil, and physical conformation. I guess I would sum this up with whoever lives near the most bounteous land first will progress first. Where much animal food and warm clothing are required, where the earth seems poor and niggard, where the exuberant life of tropical forests mocks barbarous man's puny efforts to control, where mountains, deserts, or arms of the sea separate and isolate men, association and the power of improvement which it involves can at first go but a little way. Yes, these are all examples of difficulties to early civilization. Maybe we should start a civilization gaming channel. Civ, starting with Civ 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now 6. Or 7, 7 they've announced. Civ 7. But on the rich plains of warm climates, where human existence can be maintained with a smaller expenditure of force, and from a much smaller area, men can keep closer together, and the mental power which can at first be devoted to improvement is much greater. Hence, civilization naturally first arises in the great valleys and tablelands, where we find its earliest monuments. But these diversities in natural conditions not merely thus directly produce diversities in social development, but by producing diversities in social development, bring out in man himself an obstacle, or rather an active counterforce to improvement. As families and tribes are separated from each other, the social feeling ceases to operate between them, and differences arise in language, custom, tradition, religion. In short, in the whole social web which each community, however small or large, constantly spins. With these differences, prejudices grow, animosities spring up, contact easily produces quarrels, and aggression begets aggression, and wrong kindles revenge. How easy it is for ignorance to pass into contempt and dislike. How natural it is for us to consider any difference in manners, customs, religion, etc., as proof of the inferiority of those who differ from us. Anyone who has emancipated himself in any degree from prejudice, and who mixes with different classes, may see in civilized society. Well, yeah, how easy it is for ignorance to pass into contempt and dislike. How natural it is to consider any differences. This all may see in civil anyone may see in civilized society. In religion, for instance, the spirit of the hymn, I'd rather be a Baptist and wear a shining face than for to be a Methodist and always fall from grace. I don't think these should be bullet points, but it's alright. It's observable in all denominations. As the English bishop said, orthodoxy is my doxy, and heterodoxy is any other doxy. While the universal tendency is to classify all outside of the orthodoxies and heterodoxies of the prevailing religion as heathens or atheists, and the like tendency is observable as to all other differences. And so between these separate social aggregates arises the feeling of Ishmael and the spirit of Cain. Warfare becomes the chronic and seemingly natural relation of societies to each other, and the powers of men are expended in attack or defense, in mutual slaughter and mutual destruction of wealth, or in warlike preparations. How long this hostility persists, the protective tariffs and the standing armies of the civilized world today bear witness. How difficult it is to get over the idea that it is not theft to steal from a foreigner. The difficulty in procuring an international copyright act will show. How How can we wonder at the perpetual hostilities of tribes and clans? Can we wonder that when each community was isolated from the others, when each uninfluenced by the others was spinning its separate web of social environment, which no individual can escape, that war should have been the rule and peace the exception? They were even as we are. He this was maybe we don't need the quotes then. Yeah, there's two. Is the end of all investigation into history or art. They were even as we are. Emanuel Deutsch. All right. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, reflect on it, that they were even as we are.